Welcome to Nature Connects, the podcast where we explore the deep relationships between people, place and the natural world. In this episode, celebrating National Tree Week, we're joined by Ben Norwood from the Forest for Cornwall, a bold and visionary project working to transform Cornwall's landscape through trees. We'll be diving into the ecological and climate importance of trees, their role in restoring biodiversity and connecting habitats, and how communities across Cornwall are coming together to plant, protect and celebrate trees. Whether you're a seasoned tree champion or just tree curious, this episode will inspire you to see trees not just as part of the landscape, but as part of our future. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. We've driven through sheets of rain and we've now got glorious sunshine.
Very lucky.
Somebody is on our side. So it would be great for our listeners if you could just start off by introducing yourself, your role with Forest for Cornwall and the project.
Yeah, okay. I'm one of the project officers with Forest for Cornwall. It's run by the Cornwall Council. I've been with it for about 5 years now. And I'm one of the project officers that goes out and provides advice and supports people wanting to plant trees or maybe thinking about planting trees. And we help them either access grants that might be provided by the Forestry Commission, or if it's not eligible for that, they can then access maybe some of the grants that we've been able to provide over the past few years, which have been supported by DEFRA's Woodland Creation Partnership. And we've been able to support a whole range of planting activities, not only in the farmed and wider landscape, but also in our urban environment as well.
So we are on the top of the hill in Not a Bridge between Callington and Liscard. Could you tell us a little bit about this project here?
So Cornwall Council was one of the few local authorities that actually retained a lot of its county farms assets, and as part of its initiatives looking at the climate and ecological emergencies and trying to reduce its carbon footprint going forward, it had basically an opportunity mapping exercise across its estate, and it put the land here, it's about a hectare in total at Not a Bridge, and it sits just above the liner, as a candidate for tree planting. And Cornwall Council was keen to lead by example, and where it was appropriate for tree planting, like having the right tree in the right place, which is a mantra we try and follow, try and see what areas of its land it owned could be put under trees. And so this was planted, Not a Bridge here, about 3 or 4 years ago. It was planted local residents as well as Cornwall Council staff. We had some other organisations come in and help us, and we planted about 1,000 trees, fairly low density planting, and all native broadleaf, with the idea is that it would extend that sort of native broadleaf woodland that's coming out of the Liner Valley up over the hill here. And it also allowed an opportunity for a little permissive path to come off the public footpath at the bottom of the valley. And we also used it as an opportunity to trial biodegradable guards, nature-friendly guards, and we're having a bit of a long-term experiment trying to understand how durable they are, how well they work and things like that, because there's a lot of interest we get from the public and landowners and about trying to reduce their plastic use or impacts on the environment as well.
Yeah. So what are the outcomes of that looking like currently?
I think it's a little bit early days. There are some sort of telling signs at the moment. We know they're not as durable as traditional plastic, but we also know that traditional plastic guards can obviously have that very long-term legacy impact,
yes.
Particularly if they're not removed from planting sites, which we do quite often see. And I know over the years of my career, I've been into woods 20, 30, 40 years old, and you're still seeing guards around trees. So I think it's definitely well worth supporting that industry, because it is something, particularly with all the ambition and targets that have been set by government, local government organisations, all sorts of people around the amount of trees that we wish to establish in the landscape. And we do need to protect them, because we've got really big problems with deer at the moment. We've got deer at the highest population levels that we've seen in the country, and in Cornwall we're seeing increasing populations of red deer as well, along with fallow roe. You might see the occasional muntjac, but thankfully we don't have the muntjac issues that they do up country, but it's inevitable that they will come, and that deer pressure is a real problem for tree establishment.
Yes.
So yeah, with that as a project, we're also trying to see how we can support initiatives around deer control, grey squirrel control and things like that. So we're not only trying to look at that immediate idea of tree planting, but also what the legacy impacts are, and try and engender that sort of action that needs to happen.
Yeah, the aftercare and the management that follows that on for then.
Definitely, because it's easy to plant trees,
yes.
but it's that, how do you get them to establish and thrive in the long term, really? It's that sort of establishment, which is like the key phrase, really. The first few years and beyond. Yeah, the investment long term. Yeah, because I mean, you can stick trees in the ground, but you haven't necessarily created a wood. You know, you sort of, a wood takes many centuries to develop. So, but it's how we get it to that point, and make sure it gets off to that best possible start, really. So this episode marks National Tree Week, running from the 22nd to the 30th of November, and is led by the Tree Council. So why is this week significant, and how does it align with Forest for Cornwall's mission? So National Tree Week was started by the Tree Council a number of years ago, and it's really, I suppose, a clarion call for people to take an interest in trees, particularly those outside of woodlands. And it's really just the start of a celebration of trees, helping people try and get enthused, help plant new trees, look after those existing spaces. And it really aligns with our project, partly because then there's some really great public events that people can get involved with. You can find out a lot more about that on Tree Council's website, various other partner organisation website. But it kicks off the planting season really in earnest for the next season. So then that planting season will run from now in Tree Week through to probably about the end of March, sort of early April sort of time. And it's a really great opportunity for people, like I said, to celebrate trees and go out and explore either the trees and woods in their local environment. I sort of say to people, if you haven't found your favourite tree yet, go and find it now, because when's a better opportunity? We've just come through this beautiful period of autumn, and there's that real sort of sense of discovery which you can have. And we know that wooded environments and places with trees, even our parks and urban places, are really good for the soul, for want of a better phrase. They sort of really help enrich our world and help us get out of our heads sometimes and get away from the frantic nature of that sort of day-to-day life we have. Yes, and just be more tree. Yeah. So, and like I said, sometimes it can be really good for kickstarting new planting initiatives. A lot of community groups are doing work. Schools are maybe rediscovering those places they have on their school grounds and making a new recommitment to those places to look after them. But also, it's maintenance is never a flashy thing to sell, but actually looking after some of our existing places is really important. And it can be just simple things of either going out and using those footpaths, going out and exploring them, but also maybe go and do litter pick and something like that. Or if there's a community group looking for volunteers to help remove tree guards, can you get involved and help with that? It's getting to know your local area and supporting those initiatives that might be going on. Can you talk us through that vital importance of trees in our landscape, and especially as we stand here on the fringes of the national landscape? I can see right in the distance Dartmoor, we've got the Liner and then the Tamar. So as we're standing on Cornwall side looking across the landscape, just the part trees play. So trees in that sort of wider landscape, they help connect existing wooded habitats. The Liner and Tamar valleys are connected by very steep incised river valleys, and we know that trees are really great at helping slow water flows and help mitigate those peak water events. So they have a really invaluable role to play in the sort of floodwater management and things like that. We have an incredibly rich treescape. We're very fortunate in this neck of the woods for Cornwall. Our biggest and oldest trees in Cornwall are found within the Liner Valley and so elements, parts of the Tamar. We think of the Darley oak, which is, we think, maybe between 700 and 900 years old. And it's part of a network of big old trees that are either in the wood pastures, the orchards, the hedgerows, and all those different wooded habitat types and different treescapes. They help improve that connectivity for wildlife through the environment as well. They're also a massive part of our cultural heritage, really. We know that areas were more treed back in the day. We only have to look at old maps from even like the OS first edition to see there was more hedgerows in the landscape. And when you look at old pictures, aerial photographs, you see things like elm trees. And I'm part of a generation who essentially has grown up without seeing large amounts of elm there. And so there's this real risk of what they call creeping baseline. So the next generation sees like essentially an elm-free landscape as the new norm.
Yes.
Essentially, or particularly mature elm. You might see the odd occasional one, but not really as abundant as it was. And we're seeing this repeated again with things like ash dieback as well. So, where it's really sad to witness. It must have felt exactly the same back in the 70s with Dutch elm disease. But where if we're losing those large ash, there will be a future generation with another raft of species sort of gone. And they'll think that's the new norm. Whereas actually this sort of gradual denuding or managing down our trees and our hedgerows, be it through modern day agricultural practices or development or just disease and pests and things like that, it just reframes things. And that's been quite extensive in other parts of the country where we've seen the impacts of that quite badly. In the Tamar and Liner valleys, actually, we still, compared to other areas of the country, still very fortunate to have this very rich hedged landscape, but also a really complex landscape as well, because we've got that influence of the moors, Bodmin and Dartmoor coming in, and the big valley systems associated with the Tamar, and the lovely estuaries that sort of come out from that. So, and the Tamar and Liner area is really important for orchards. Again, massively reduced compared to what they once were, but they still are quite big areas, really important areas, and they have lots of important species and rare habitat associated with them. The trees in a wider context for Cornwall, they're important, but we're in a maritime climate, very exposed. So our treescape is predominantly confined to the valleys, really. When you start getting up into the high points of the peninsula, and it's true for Devon as well, or onto the moors and things like that, the vegetation becomes that much shorter. Yes, partly because of long history, several thousand years of clearances and graduals of using those spaces, but also nature of the geology and also the wind and the salt winds and things like that really stunt our growth. So trees help to provide protection ultimately in this sort of climate that we have for livestock, for our homes, for crops and things like that we grow. So they have a real important role in helping maintain that cultural landscape, the ecological connectivity, but also provide that sort of shelter to make sure that we can grow things like our food and stuff like that.
As you've talked us through those different woody habitats, but absolutely, and then I was thinking of sites like Kabila, and that we are seeing that raise in profile and the terminology and the excitement of actually we have rainforests, we have these amazing temperate rainforests. So it's that education, isn't it, of raising the profile and educating people that they haven't got to look to the other side of the globe. They need to look on their doorstep and actually not that far away, and there's some really ancient and unique wooded habitats.
And it's not I'm guilty as some other people of there's a degree of cynicism sometimes when people come up with new terms. You think, well, we've always had these habitats, why do we need to call it temperate rainforest? But actually, if it really galvanises or grabs people's interest, then it's a great way, and actually it's really descriptive of what we've got and why it's important. That sort of temperate rainforest, the valley woods through Devon and Cornwall, particularly in the rears, the sunken river valleys. So you've got places like the Tamar, the Liner, the Loo, the Foy, the Fal estuaries, all those. They have this long history of managed woodlands, oak coppice predominantly, So they are actually an artificial woodland type, really, because they've been managed over the centuries to produce a single product. And that was used in things like getting the bark for tanning leather, as well as charcoal and some other bits and pieces. But what it's created is this really amazing ecology associated with it, particularly around the epiphytes, so those things like lichens, the bryophytes, so those lower plant communities, the mosses, liverworts and ferns. And we've, in the southwest and a lot of places in Cornwall, got a really high number of species associated with this environment. Some internationally rare. One of the sites I used to manage, it was one of only 4 sites in the country where the particular lichens were known. And so these are internationally important sites. And it's because of that humid environment that we have. And like you said, we don't necessarily have to go abroad to find this, these sort of really interesting woodland environments.
Yes.
You only find this sort of Atlantic oak woodland, temperate rainforest, a few places around the globe. Because we've got this, again, this maritime influence of our climate, particularly on the western half of the British Isles, so places like Wales, the west coast of Scotland, parts of Ireland, the southwest peninsula, where the soil types are right, the species that we have down here are conducive to those habitats as well. We've got clean air, so we're, again, that sort of maritime influence and that humidity, which is really, really key.
Yes. And I absolutely agree. It's not getting lost or losing ourselves in the terminology.
Definitely.
And it's just go and connect with that habitat, whatever it's called.
Whatever it is.
And people are calling it different things, but that's it. Just connect with it. Do features like hedgerows, woodland, corridors and agroforestry enhance landscape connectivity and ecological health? And thinking about the projects that you've been working on, Ben, how that the science behind it informs your offer and future works?
Yeah, so we collectively call those that group of tree environments, so the orchards, the hedgerows, the wood pastures, anything else, trees outside of woodlands. And they have a really important part to play in our efforts for, overall tree canopy cover, but also having those initiatives to combat climate change. But then they have such an important role in connecting those, as I said before, those wooded environments across the landscape. And they help put that complexity back in the landscape. Nature abhors simplicity. If you want diversity in species, you need that diversity in habitats. And where you've got things like hedgerows, you've got the option for rough margins against them. It allows all sorts of things to nest and feed in those environments. When you think of a hedgerow or trees outside of trees in fields or things like that, they create a vertical element to the environment there, which you just don't get in grasslands, really. Although grasslands can be textured slightly in well-managed meadows and things like that, but it's only up to a certain height.
Yeah, I was on a hedge laying course last week and they were describing the hedge as a 3D
Definitely
meadow. It's, if you look at it, like, as you say, in that vertical
and it's
sense.
all those sort of niches that you find. You sort of think this, we've got the beech hedge that sort of forms one of the boundaries to this planting that we're standing in. And some of those trees actually stand a little bit more isolated than others. And those trees are open grown. And Britain's landscape, we have an incredible population of open grown trees. And those are really important because they've got branches on all sides. And they quite often have branches at low levels going right up to maybe 20, 30 metres. And there are species that will occupy different heights of the canopy at different sides of the canopy. So, an open-grown tree can sometimes have more options for species to occupy it, to live in there, than, say, a wood. And because of that, we have some amazing species and really rare species associated with those older trees, particularly ancient and veteran trees that we find in our hedgerows and orchards. And quite often the hedge landscape, orchards, wood pastures, they contain our oldest trees, and those habitats that have also persisted over time, for centuries, millennia sometimes. In Cornwall, we know that some of our hedgerows are still in use after several thousand years, and that's the same in other parts of the country as well. And so what it allows, it creates all these different niches, different micro-habitats to develop. So particularly referring to things like decay wood or dead wood, and that takes centuries to develop. And there are species that will only occupy dead wood, and there are species that will only feed on things that live on things in dead wood, and there are species that will only live in certain species dead wood. For example, we call them obligates, so they will live on things like ash trees and things like that. So nature has specialised over the millions of years to develop this incredible diversity that we have, but they've needed those habitats to exist through time, and having this rich landscape allows those opportunities for those trees to exist in the landscape over time. And having that diversity, and even things like orchards, you get those sort of specialist species that particularly traditionally managed orchards, and you get all sorts of things sort of living in there from, and in our old trees like bats, birds, lots of invertebrates, things like the bryophytes, the epiphytes that live on the tree as well. If we gradually iron those out and lose those bits out of our landscape, we lose the options for habitat. So that's where having that really rich landscape of different things going on really helps. I think also it's part of our cultural heritage as well, which I always really think of ourselves. We're a country that probably venerates trees more than we do woods, because trees, particularly in things like hedgerows or some wood pastures, were actively used by people. They provided the fuel that we use to heat our homes, the timber and the materials we use to build our homes. And so people looked after those trees. And we also know that they were used for what we call tree hay, so feeding animals and things like that, providing shelter for the agricultural landscape as well. And those trees and hedges and things like that, they allow us to grow food as well. So it's that land sharing idea rather than have to be one thing or the other. It's a much more integrated way of using the land and making sure that we can still feed ourselves, which is an important consideration.
And would you say that, where we spoke earlier about the shifting baseline, but that mindset change of coming back round to wood pasture and coming back round to valuing woody habitats and those woody corridors for fuel, for food, and connecting that and seeing it in a much more holistic sense through your work, do you feel that landowners, farmers are opening up to the idea of having agroforestry type setups back on farm?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a resurging interest in it. I think arguably you could say a lot of the UK, and particularly those areas rich in hedgerows, is already an agroforestry landscape.
Absolutely.
We've been doing it for thousands of years. Predecessors knew the value of hedgerows and trees in those environments and how they could manipulate them to make sure that they got the most out of the food they have. And obviously a lot of things changed post-war. We had the advent of industrial farming practices, and it's very easy to stand where I am today and criticise people back 60 odd years ago for the decisions they made. It's very different times. The requirement was, we were coming out of mass trauma, and we needed people needed to be fed, and we also needed people to be doing other things as well. So that sort of drive to increase the efficiency and productivity of our farms did require change. Now, yes, we know now maybe the pendulum went too far one way. So hopefully what we're seeing now is a bit of it just swinging back slightly the other way, because as it said, that people are, I think, really starting to re-understand or re-find the value of trees and what they can deliver, not only for aesthetic and amenity value, but also for wildlife value, but also from an agricultural point of view. And particularly when we're looking at some of the issues that climate change is now starting to pose on our farmed businesses and farm landscapes. We've got some really innovative farmers looking at how putting trees back in the landscape, and they're tying that into things like holistic grazing practices or regenerative farming practices. They're looking at how it can improve shelter provision help to reduce heat stress during those long periods of heat stress, which is particularly pertinent for dairy farms, or it can help provide alternative options for crops as well. Because what we do know is that there's undoubtedly change coming, and we can't just continue as we've been going on. So there needs to be change, and a lot of farms are being really innovative of how they can integrate trees into their farm businesses, but also understanding that just because they might have farmed an area, but it might have been through incentives in one way, didn't necessarily make it the correct way for that piece of land. And sometimes having more trees in that landscape might have been actually restoring what was there before, or just thinking it might actually help improve the quality of the farmed environment as well. So even things like helping reduce surface water runoff, floodplain management, and the farm landscape has a real critical role to play, because quite often, particularly in the upper areas of the catchments above our settlements, they've got to act as sponges basically and help hold and retain that water. And we know that with climate change we're going to be getting more stronger storms, peak weather events. So we've got to build in that natural capacity and natural resilience, because in some ways we can't hard engineer our way out of this. We've tried that. We don't have the money to do that side of things.
It's those nature-based solutions to this. Absolutely. Forest for Cornwall is a collaborative effort. Who are some of the key partners, and how do you all work together?
So since its inception, we've been led by a partnership board, and that's helped to partly steer the direction of travel, but also think about ideas as to how we want to focus our efforts as an initiative. And it also means that we hopefully have some sort of way of communicating with each other in a more formal way, because Forest for Cornwall is meant to be a county-wide initiative. It's meant to be drawing like the people and community of Cornwall and galvanise them to plant trees. It's not just the council doing things, and we're looking to get those trees in all their forms in the landscape. It's not just one big area, because still nowadays we still quite often get the question, so where is this Forest for Cornwall, and why haven't you planted it yet? So we're just always saying actually it is part of that partnership, that collaboration, and we're working with some big NGOs, such as the National Trust and the Wildlife Trust, some big landowners such as the Duchy of Cornwall, South West Water, Imeris, and some of the other large private estates. And we are providing each other with help and advice, running events around, be it things like tree planting or community events. It could be apple days, it could be apple pruning workshops. We might be also running things around managing squirrels, deer, things like that. And that we help to tell each other either what trees we've planted and where they've gone. Maybe if we're working on one project, is that next door to somebody else's, so that you can get that sort of aggregation of gains then, so you can make a much bigger impact when you work together. But with the larger landowners and larger NGOs, we're also working with local town councils, particularly in our urban environments as well. We've been running things like the Forest for My Place and the Back Garden Forest schemes, and we've been doing tree giveaways and working with those town councils as well. We've been working with some of the local environment groups as well, so we've had that, trying to respond to that sort of grassroots level, that people have got an idea, they want to support tree planting. It might have been led by the tree wardens in their local area. And we've got one parish group up on the edge of Bodmin Moor where, in response to ash dieback, they've identified all the big old ash which are essentially in decline, and they don't want to lose those trees. They have worked with their local landowners. They've identified where they are, what trees they would need, and they've got a group of volunteers to go out planting, and they've just approached us saying, can we help with supplying the trees? So we've had a look at the plans together, agreed, and we've provided the trees, and that's been a great sort of way of working, helping them, or working with the tree wardens, Tree Salt Ash, where they're looking at how they can get more trees in that urban environment. And again, we've supported them with things like checking utilities, doing stakeholder consultation, and maybe helping provide trees as well, and giving them a bit of that sort of professional advice around, is it the right tree, how well are they likely to thrive, what might you need to do. So yeah, we've been trying to work across at all levels really, and try and respond where we can to try and get that. It doesn't just have to be the big schemes, the big shiny, everything, the older schemes, but actually what works best for our local communities as well. Yes. We had a scheme through working with people like the WI or other parishes as well, where we had the landmark tree programme. Right. They could celebrate events like the Jubilee, and we'd provide a larger tree which they could then plant as a community, and that was sometimes just one tree in one location. Yes. But again, it sort of marked a really important event. So. Yeah.
So before we move into some reflection, it'd just be really good to know what's on with Forest for Cornwall, what's coming up next, and the future of the initiative.
Yeah, so Tree Week, as mentioned, really starts off the tree planting season. This year is set to be our busiest yet. The enthusiasm from people, there's no let-up in demand for people wanting to plant trees. We're going to be seeing over 30 kilometres of new hedgerows go in, about 70 hectares of orchards, over 100 and I think it's about 30 hectares of woodland, and over 200 hectares of agroforestry systems going in. So it's all in all, there's a lot going on just this year alone. And to date, we've planted about 1.6 million trees since the initiative started. And as I said, there doesn't seem to be any let up. And so that's really encouraging, is that it really is this sort of head of steam which is being built, and people are really wanting to plant trees. So we know our funding model and our work with DEFRA has shown that we can provide an easy route to funding and supporting planting projects, not even funding all the time, but just actually providing that on the ground advice is really invaluable to actually making sure the trees either get established or get planted. And so along with this busy planting season, we're looking at what the legacy of Forest for Cornwall could be. So we've been trying to support our local nurseries through Cornwall, and we've been really fortunate to help them. And we've got some great nurseries providing all sorts of different trees to occupy different niches. And then we've also got a community tree nurseries as well, and they're working with people in their communities as well. And hopefully, along with other support around looking at how we manage things like deer and squirrels, and we're again trying to support that long-term thinking. We're putting a bid in to try and get an extension for our funding programme to try and take us through towards the end of the programme, which is around 2030, where we'll be getting closer to that 2% increase in tree canopy cover as our target. So we're still aiming for that, and fingers crossed we'll get there.
So before we finish off, Ben, could you just support our listeners who have been inspired by all the amazing information you've given us on just whether it's Forest for Cornwall or that more national picture with National Tree Week coming up, of how people can get involved wherever they are?
Yeah, so I'd encourage people to look on our website, so with Forest for Cornwall. If you type that into your search engine, we have a newsletter but also a What's On page, and along with the Tree Council they have a calendar of events, who's doing what. Other organisations such as the Woodland Trust as well will have, and the National Trust will have various activities going on during this time as well. Check out what their local environment groups are doing, look in local papers. There'll be all sorts of information going on. And as I said, we don't always have to rely on other people to organise things for us. We don't need people to give us permission to go out and find trees and go out and witness them and experience them. We can get out and go and do this for ourselves. We have that agency. So yeah, don't always wait for other people to do it for you. I'd say that would be my strongest message.
Take control and make your own plan.
Yeah, and it doesn't always have to be an activity. It can just literally just making sure you have time in your day, in your week, to go and find somewhere new with trees, go and explore somewhere. Because ultimately, if we care about places, then we value them. And if we value them, we want to look after them. Yeah. And that's the main thing.
Well, that leads really nicely into the end of our chat. So, as we've already discussed, and as the listeners know, the podcast is Nature Connect, and it is very much about promoting and encouraging our listeners, as you say, just make time in your day, in your week, to go and find a new place, find that special tree and take a moment. And whether it's a minute, an hour, the day, go and give yourself that time to connect and just be and find the solace, the peace or that connection to energise, to make plans, to move forward for positive change. And as you say, if we've got that connection, if we value, then we want to protect, we want to do something positive. So really fantastic. So I would like to ask you, if that's okay. So you said at the beginning of the interview about people asking, have you got a favourite tree or where's your favourite tree? So can I ask you, have you got a favourite tree or many?
It'd probably be one of those things that, what's your favourite tree? Is the one I'm probably standing nearest.
Exactly, at the time.
Because they're usually unique in that regard. But there are some ancient veteran trees which I really love. There's one on the Foy estuary. It's particularly old, a sycamore, so sometimes affectionately known as Celtic maple. But it's a very majestic tree. It's about 300-400 years old. It's been there just on the back end of Tudor times. It's been part of a changing, it's that sort of what it's borne witness to in the changing landscape around it, but it was planted with intent at that point, and yet still persists today. And it's got a small little nest of jackdaws in there, which every year fly out of one of the big cavities, and it's always humming with flying insects when it's in flower. I do love sycamore. There's others around Liskeard area which are big 5-6 metre girth ones. But yeah, I always sort of find it's the older trees I particularly have an interest in, because it's always that I'm always in awe of. It's the time scales they operate on. We've got trees, sort of talking about temperate rainforests earlier, where you might have to travel around the world to see other environments, but we have that here. We quite often hold in high regard that the trees in North America, which may be 3,000 years old, but we've got trees at 2,000-3,000 years old in this country. You know, be it things like lime trees, which might not necessarily be the same part of the tree, but these trees have been there possibly since Roman times. That just blows my mind sometimes.
Exactly, of what they've seen and heard and witnessed.
And I think that's, for me, that's the power of trees in terms of not only are they the homes for so much of the wildlife that occupies them, but just the fact that as an individual, they've been through this sort of hundreds, thousands of years of the world changing around them, and just really remind you actually how lucky we are as the sun comes out to actually live where we, not only live where we do, but actually we occupy one place in the universe that we know of, and it just always reminds me that we really should look after it, because we are so lucky to have what we have, and ultimately just to be alive, really.
Absolutely. Well, it's been brilliant to stand and chat with you, Ben. We've been so lucky with the weather. I could stand and ask lots more questions and talk more, but we will leave it there for today. So thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Nature Connects. My time with Ben Norwood from the Forest for Cornwall has reminded us all that trees are more than carbon sinks or wildlife havens. They're connections of people, places and stories. If you're feeling inspired, there are plenty of ways to get involved, whether through planting, volunteering or simply spending time with trees in your local area. Special thanks to Ben for his time, passion and knowledge, and to Photo Now for their technical support. Until next time, stay rooted, be curious and keep connecting with nature. This podcast has been made possible thanks to the National Lottery Heritage funded project Tamara Landscape Partnership Scheme.